Okay. So welcome. If you're just joining, feel free to throw your name in the chat where you're located. And if you've heard of FIRE or financial independence before, some people have heard about FIRE. I haven't explored it much. What's been really interesting about a friend of mine just messaged me today and said, "Hey, I saw like FIRE on the news this morning on Good Morning America." And maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, if I mentioned the word or acronym FIRE to someone, they would just be like, "What? I don't know what that is." But it seems to be like a pretty well-known concept movement now. And so it's a little bit easier to like talk to people about it and engage it, whether or not you know the fundamentals of FIRE. And so today, if you are not familiar with it, we'll go through like a little bit of an intro about FIRE and mostly how it can relate to effective altruism and how I think personal finance, financial literacy can help us all do a little bit more good, whether we're already a part of the EA movement or we're just learning about it for the first time. So let me tell you a little bit about myself first. So hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm based out of Utah, and I am one of these crazy, elusive early retirees. And about 3+ years ago, I retired. We'll talk more about that at the age of 32, which means I no longer need to work a traditional job to earn active income. So I do lots and lots of things. I don't consider myself retired, but in terms of being part of the corporate workforce in the traditional sense, I am. I spent most of my life in for-profit America working in commercial real estate. And now I run Yield and Spread, which is an EA-aligned nonprofit. And we teach people about financial literacy and also donate 100% of the proceeds from our coursework and our educational materials to the Life You Could Save. So it's a really great project. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Yield and Spread at the end of this presentation. So today I want to talk a little bit more about how we can think about personal finance in the realm of financial independence and philanthropy in the realm of effective altruism. So one of the people sometimes think that FIRE can be at odds with charitable giving, but I actually think that the FIRE movements and the effective altruism movements have a lot in similar, because people who practice the principles of financial independence are like true optimizers. Like they want to make sure that every dollar that they either spend on themselves is going to something that's meaningful and important, or every dollar that they're investing is working for them and helping them build and grow wealth. And I think that's very similar for people involved in the EA community. So if we are going to give away money, we are trying to focus on causes that mean the most to that can create the most impact versus just like based on that personal gut feeling of like what's most important or what's valuable to us. And that's true not just for donating and giving money, but also for your time and energy if you're working in an EA aligned career. So my life is so here's kind of the, like I have, I call this my like very career oriented, like straight hair Rebecca picture. And just to give you like a slice of what my life looked up like before the age of 32, I was just like working like insane hours. I was trying to grow my salary as much as possible. I worked in major cities all over the world. And so I think on paper, this looked extremely successful and looked very appealing. But what no one really talked about was how like I felt like I had little time for my health and passions. I felt like I had less time to pursue causes that I was passionate about, that many of which are EA aligned. I didn't feel like I had a lot of time to just like give back in a way where I just really only felt like I was thinking about myself for survival. It's not like things were horrible. It's just like I was part of that rat race and that hamster wheel. And so discovering financial independence really helped me move out of that kind of like survival mode and reactionary mode and kind of take a little bit more control of my life and lead it in a way that I find is meaningful. And so today I spend a lot of time outdoors. I work from different locations, not just from like, again, I worked pre-COVID, so probably a lot of you can work in different places now, but at the time I was going into the office every day. and I get to volunteer in causes that are important to me. So enough about myself. Let's talk about what financial independence is. So it is, again, financial independence. You have reached FI when you have enough passive income from your assets to cover your expenses. It means you no longer need to work a traditional job to earn active income to cover your expenses. You are using passive income to cover your expenses. Things like your money is saved up and invested, and you have things like dividends, interest, and you're living off of that sort of income. So the math is, and this is based off of a study, it's called the Trinity study that was done in the US. And so the math is when you have 25 times your annual expenses saved up and invested, you are technically financially independent. And so the way to think about this in the backward sense is when you have 25 times saved up, you can withdraw 4% from your portfolio without ever running out of money. So translation, let's say you spend $40,000 US a year. You need 1 million or 25 times 40,000 saved up and invested to be considered financially independent. And that means you can withdraw 4% down from your portfolio without technically ever running out of money. And this is because you are invested in a mixture of stocks and bonds that are growing over time. And thus you can take money from that portfolio in addition to the dividends and interest that you are earning along the way without drawing down on that nest egg and running the risk of running out of money. So this is the exact same rule, obviously very simplified, that I follow in my everyday life. And that as an early retiree, I have been following for the past 3 years. So I live off of my stock dividends and my bond interest, and I sell a little bit of my assets each month to cover my lifestyle. And so far, so good, it's working for me. Some people find the 4% rule to be a little risky. And so they might save up even more, like they'll save 30 times their annual expenses to just be totally extra triple sure that they never run out of money. And this is perfectly fine. Many people take this approach, but I've sort of taken the 25x approach. And this is very common in the US, where we can, control the amount of taxes that we face a little bit more than in other countries. But the same kind of study applies, and people use this globally. So why? Okay, I'm talking about I'm an early retiree, 32, I left the workforce. What is the whole point of financial independence? The whole point of it is that you get to design a life that you want to live with meaning, and you get to focus on your passions that are important to you. So for example, you don't have to be like me. You don't have to early retire. You don't have to leave the workforce completely, but you could say work part-time. So if you have kids and they're in daycare and you have a partner, you and your partner could both work part-time and then no longer need to send your kids to daycare, and you could spend more time with them. You could go part-time at your full-time job. So then you can work on, as a contractor for EA projects and use the skills that you have. You can travel, you can explore, just spend time in ways that's important to you. One of the things that I think is most powerful about FI is you're able to work on projects that you're passionate about without having to worry about income. So for example, I have a lot more time to work on yield and spread. If I were super focused on making yield and spread into this highly profitable business so that I could live off that, I have a feeling that it would look really different than what it does now. And so just having that freedom to build something without the prospect of having to monetize it is really helpful. Quick question from Julie in the chat. Does the chart account for tax penalties for early withdrawal for retirement accounts? So Julia, the chart takes into account, it doesn't take into account all the tax regulations that you think it would take into account from. It basically assumes that you have navigated your retirement accounts in the best ways possible, that you are minimizing your taxes based on historical tax rates today. So if you are going about and withdrawing your money from your retirement accounts in ways that are not favorable, then yeah, you'd be eating away faster. But theoretically, you've set up a financial plan that you're not like taking away. I've yet to have to do something like that. If a huge emergency came up, I still think I wouldn't have to do that. So theoretically, you shouldn't have to follow that model. But there's all these ways, and I can share resources afterwards to level up your financial knowledge to make sure that you're not doing something like that. So theoretically, in the US specifically, this is US guidance, your taxes should be lower in your early retirement because our US tax structure is so focused on income levels versus your overall net worth. And theoretically, you would be making lower income in the future. Hopefully that answers your question. So why do I think financial independence, I've already touched on this, can be a force for good? You just have more freedom and autonomy to be the person that you want to be and to spend the time in the way that's meaningful. First of all, from a money perspective, you'll have spent a lot of time thinking about how much money you need to live a happy and healthy life, right? So if you're thinking, oh, I spend $40,000 a year, and maybe that might go up and down with kids or with health things or as you age. But generally speaking, you have a very good grasp on how much money you need to live a happy and healthy life. It is much easier to create space to give back when you're not in that scarcity mindset. You have more time, right? So you can make choices aligned with your values. You have time to give skills away. If you're a computer programmer or if you're a designer or any skills, you can help volunteer, give those to an organization. Heck, you could even get paid for it, right? You could give those skills to causes that are important to you. You could even continue to work your traditional job and just donate that money in an earn to give sense. And lastly, you have a voice. So, for me, like I found that thank you. So like for me, I found that as I got closer to FI, that I was able to speak up a little bit more. I wasn't so scared about losing my job or offending someone because I had the money that I need to feel secure and to make the choices that I wanted to make. And so I just found like I spoke up more. I was more opinionated. I gave my just like open mind more. And that's, I think, something that's really powerful and helpful in the EA community. Okay, so let's get into some examples of like what FI looks like with like a donation strategy. Is anyone here like either into earn to give or like thinking about earn to give? And when I say earn to give, I don't mean like you have to donate 50% of your salary, but just like you've taken the pledge or you're considering taking the pledge or something like that by show of hands or throw in the chat. Yeah. Okay. So this might resonate with you guys then. So here's an example of what and again, we're very high level math about what FI might look like with a donation strategy in place. So let's take this person who earns $75K a year. To some people, this might be a lot of money. To some people, this might not be a lot of money. But I think given the sociodemographics of the EA community, this is pretty, an appropriate number that shouldn't make us too uncomfortable. Let's say that this person spends $35,000 a year. So they make 75 after taxes and they spend 35. They've made a commitment to donate 5K a year. So that's almost 7% of this person's income. And so they're saving nearly 50% of their salary. This is a very, very, very good savings rate, right? Based on the 4% rule, it would take this person 16 years to hit FI based on the amount that they're saving and the amount that they're saving and investing in it growing, right? So it would take them 16 years to hit financial independence based on how much they spend each year, which is really the 35,000 plus the 5K that they're donating. Because really when we are donating, it is truly from a math sense, just another expense. So that's pretty good, right? You have this, let's just call it a 21-year-old entering the workforce, and they are going to be able to retire if they want by the time they're 36. And if they don't want, they can just continue earning money and growing it and investing it. So from a donation perspective, what does this look like? Over time, this person has built in regular donations into their budget. over the course of 50 years, they would donate $250,000 each, over the course of time to EA related causes that were important to them. They're making those now donations. They also still get the benefit of retiring early, 16 years of work, and they get to invest to give still, because upon their death, they have this nest egg that they have been living off of in that FIRE lifestyle, right? They're not going to draw down on it completely, because that would be extremely dangerous. Based on the 4% rule, it would be really, really rare to have to do that. So they would theoretically not run out of money. And then that money is sitting there investing, growing, and they can donate that upon their old age. So I see a lot, like in the EA forum and in the community, when I'm talking with people, like, should I donate now versus invest to give? What's better, what's not? I don't think there's any real conclusion around it, except I think some combination of both is appropriate, where you are able to target cause areas that you are focused on now, but you have this nest egg that's taking care of yourself, right? Yourself and your retirement. And also you're able to then give that money away. Does that make sense to you guys, this concept? Okay, so by show of hands, did anyone here get the chance to like play around with the retirement calculator? I wasn't able to like email people, but I did put it in the comments. So just give me a thumbs up. Eli, oh no, that's Jesper. Yeah, I think maybe I saw you grab that. Okay, cool. We'll get the chance now to play around with this calculator that I created. I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's to a Google Doc. It's going to ask you to go ahead and make a copy. And we'll walk through an example together. And then after this, we'll have time to chat as a group about some concepts or ideas. Can you guys all see this Google Sheet? So this section on the left is asking you to put in certain information about yourself. And this is very reflective of a FIRE calculator that you will see in many, many places. So it will ask you for your income after taxes, your annual expenses, and your current portfolio value, what you have invested today in liquid stocks, bonds, and assets. So if you own a primary home, for example, that you're not like renting out, but you're just living in, that wouldn't go in here because it's not necessarily earning you passive income, right? So you'd put in your annual income, annual expenses, and current portfolio value. So if you guys have never done this type of work before, you can go ahead and just like put in different values and play around. In the comments in the EA forum, I gave like a detailed exercise how you can actually go about and find this exact information for yourself. And boy, will I tell you, just having that level of awareness of like what you actually spend on a year basis, like that should be something as you become like a money rock star that you feel comfortable saying like, I spend this a year, and having full knowledge of that is super empowering, especially in the context of how much you make. So in this model, I'll just keep, I'll say I'm 25 years old. Haha, I'm not, I'm 10 years older than that, but we could wish. I'll say I make 60K. I say I'll spend 40K. I'll say I've done a good job already in my life. I already have $50,000 saved up and invested. And then the annual return on investment. In the US, it's common to use 5%, which is a mixture of like the historical growth rate for a mixture of having stocks and bonds, stocks being more risky, bonds being more conservative. It also takes into account the historical inflation rate. So that's another thing, Julia, does the chart account for tax penalties? In this sense, it does account for inflation. And then it's the safe withdrawal rate of 4%. So if you're somebody who's super conservative, you can throw out 3.5%, but just know it means you need to save up more money. And what I love about this is it shows me, okay, my FI target number is $1 million, and I will reach FI once I'm 48 years old. And then what I can see from here is like, how does this number shift or change or take form if I were to take a pledge? And so if I were to take say One for the World pledge, that means I would donate $600 a year. Of course, I might earn more income over time, right? And that's to be accounted for. But over, the course of 50 years, I would donate 30 grand. And what I love about this is it shows the impact to my FI timeline or my target number with the 1% pledge. And if I were to change it to 2%, it would show me the impact if I were to take a 2% donation. And so if I took a 2% donation pledge, it would only take me 1.2 more years of working. And so in the scheme of things, let's pretend I'm a person who never knew about FIRE ever. Now I've learned about FIRE. Now it's only going to take me till I'm 48 years old to retire early. Plus maybe only an additional year, assuming I never earn another raise again, which we know is not true, to donate 1% or to donate 2%. So I think, when we just say, hey, I'm going to give away 2% of my income, that's may feel hard for some people to stomach. But when you actually put the math behind it, I think for me, like as an individual, when I can see the math, that's when I'm better able to make decisions, remove myself from that scarcity mindset, and actually know what I'm working with and have tangible data. And there's a bunch of information, where you can see kind of in these graphs below. I won't get into it, sort of additional information that you could see beyond just the impact to your timeline. So Aaron said, how should we account for inflation and other growth expenses and income over this horizon? Yeah. So Aaron, one of the things that like I have done, I've seen people like build in models into these calculators where you can say, like, let's assume my income increases 1% year over year. Let's assume my expenses increase 1% year over year. But as a short fix, you could take this calculator and do like a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So in inflation wise, this assumes that the historical inflation rate is like rooted. We know right now, like in the US, for example, inflation over the past year has been 8%. It's been astronomically high. But historically speaking, it's between 2 and 3%. And so like it's this inflation rate that's being taken into account is over the last 100 years. So from an inflation perspective, if you feel like we're headed into a world where, there's more inflation to be expected, you can always lower this safe withdrawal rate to say 3.5%. But I don't think that's necessary because again, we've had rates of inflation at like 17%, 18%, and this 5% takes that into account already. But again, if you're nervous, you can either lower the annual return on investment or lower the safe withdrawal rate. From a how should we account for growth and expenses and income, I would do like a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So your best case might be what you're doing today with maybe some improvements if you're looking to do that. And then just throw in an income that's you feel like capable in your career horizon, and an expense that might be X greater because you have kids, because you have a health problem, and then see what the variance is, right? And I would base that number based on the timeline. So like I have 10 more years of working versus 20 more years of working. So it's not, the other thing to consider too, it's not an exact science as well, because in here I wrote my portfolio value is 50K. But as we all know, if we look at our bank accounts, it changes day to day, right? So like the number that I retired with would be different today if I haven't touched any of that at all. And so it's because the market goes up and down and stock values and bond values go up and down. So it's never going to be perfect, but we just want to be in the range of what we are comfortable with. Any other questions on the calc before we skip to some breakout questions? I think so normally what I would do is I would break us into a few different groups, but because we are like half video, half not, I think I'll just open this up to the wider group and just bring out some of these questions to you guys, like, do we think that FIRE is a useful concept for people in the EA community? Do we think it's empowering? Do we think there are synergies? Do we think that there are conflicts? Has this calculator given you a new perspective on like taking a pledge or your finances? any sort of pros versus giving now versus later, please feel free to unmute yourself directly and ask any questions.
This has been very useful. And I just wanted to ask about the safe withdrawal rate. Could you maybe clarify exactly what that is?
Yeah. So I'm going to just type into the chat. This is based on something called the Trinity study. And basically what they did is, I'm glad you asked this question. Basically what they did is they made like a matrix, and they looked at people's portfolio values when they retired. And if they ran out of money over the course of 30 years, they've since redone the study to include 40 years, but the original is based on 30 years. So if I retired when I'm 32, technically this study only lasts me until I'm 62, but they've reevaluated the study, which would last me until I'm 72. So I'm kind of like taking a leap of faith that I can get an extra couple decades out of it by being such an early retiree. But basically at its core is it evaluated the risk of failure, or the risk of you drawing completely down on your portfolio based on the allocations of stocks versus bonds you would have. So they looked at if you had 100% stocks, if you had 90% stocks versus 10% bonds, 80% stocks versus 20% bonds, so on and so forth. And the investment data that they used was investing in a total stock market fund. So you're investing in every single company that you could possibly invest in that's publicly traded, and investing in a total bond market fund where you're investing in any single sort of bond fund that you can possibly invest in. And then what they also did as part of this matrix is they looked at all points of time in which you could have retired. So if you retired on May 1st, 1990, May 2nd, 1990, because when you retire kind of matters. So when I retired during COVID. I retired when the markets were down. I have retired when inflation is very, very high. And so I am like the scenario you don't want to necessarily be in. When markets are down, I have less money in my portfolio, and inflation is high, which means the cost of goods and services are higher than usual. So if you retire in a market like that, that's a little more challenging versus if I retired in a market where stocks are incredibly valued and at an all-time high and inflation is low. And so they took into account your allocations and what time in the market cycle that you retired and came up with a failure rate. And so the numbers are extremely promising, are most promising when you have an allocation of 80% stocks and 20% bonds. You are least likely to fail over a 30-year time period. And the success rates are like 98+%. Which is really like astounding. And the other 2% could be a scenario where you just have like happen to just come into a shitstorm of like the worst possible timing ever for your retirement. But this is also true for the case if you retired at the traditional retirement age of 65. So that's the Trinity study in a nutshell. If you just Google it, the Wikipedia articles does a really good job at explaining it. And then Michael Hitsis, who I think is astounding, super helpful, amazing if you're in the US. He and his team kind of redid the study to show that actually the 4% rule is like even more conservative than we think it might be. Yeah. And the other thing to consider too, right, from like a risk of failure is if I'm 32, I'm healthy, I have skills. If I need to go back to work, even just for a little bit, I probably can. And so it's not like I'm retiring and that's it. Like if things start looking shady for me, I'm not locked into this decision and saying like, oh, I really committed to this. I can go get a job anywhere. I can get a job at a coffee shop just to cover my expenses a little bit. So I'm not drawing down on my portfolio. Any other thoughts or even questions?
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Evan.
Oh, thank you. I had one more question related to the safe withdrawal rate and how it relates to the annual return.
Yeah.
I guess when I think about those numbers, I think of them being the same thing. Is the main difference why those aren't the same because the annual return is like an average case, and the safe withdrawal rate is like a conservative, as you said, like 98 percentile sort of case? Or are there other differences besides that which makes those not make those be different numbers?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, Aaron, if you play around with those numbers, it's going to kind of impact the output in the same way. So if you lower the growth rate or you lower your safe withdrawal rate, the result is going to be, I need to work longer or I need to earn more money. That's going to be the result. But in actuality, what's happening is different. So for example, historically speaking, if you invested in a total US stock market fund for like the last 100 years, on average, the growth rate has been 7-8%. So that doesn't mean every year it's 7 or 8%. It means on average over the course of those 100 years, it's been 8%. So if I were to say, I think stocks are the way to go, and I think on a go-forward basis, that growth rate looks more like 10%, you could up that number, right? And so if you up that number, if you have a higher growth rate, the power of compound returns works in your favor even more, and your money will grow really fast. The safe withdrawal rate assumes that your ability to max drawdown on your portfolio is 4% of that total portfolio every year. So theoretically, you need the growth rate to be higher than the withdrawal rate, or else you have some sort of problem. So if you went into this calculator and put in 1% for the growth rate and you're withdrawing 4%, you will 100% chance of running out of money over time. So that's how these things interact with each other. J.L. Collins, who is like one of my favorite FIRE authors, sort of says like, companies are motivated to be profitable and to succeed. And so like, if you're investing in, say, the top 100 most profitable companies, and to those companies, the leaders, like, I guess like Elon Musk comes into Twitter and just decides to implode the whole thing, right? Like someone else will replace them and go into the top 100 because companies are striving to be profitable, and therefore you can expect to receive, the fruits of those profits. That makes sense?
Wanted to mention two things. One is maybe just to add to what you said, in addition to the ability to, step back to the work market if needed, there's also the ability to say after retirement, oh, actually this year, I don't necessarily need to withdraw this much, so I can save more for later, for years where I need more. So you have this ability to balance out and control, kind of, and account for fluctuations. Secondly, just
Yes.
wanted to mention that this is a useful perspective, looking at donation as an expense, and then looking at the nest egg as something that can be donated later is again the very compelling point. So thank you.
Great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. And I mean, I think what Eli is saying, like, the two things about the FIRE community and the EA community that they really have in common is people are resourceful and they're smart and they work for solutions that are meaningful. And so like, if there's a situation where like I'm spending too much, I have options, so many options. And because I'm thinking about things in a new way and I have more space to breathe, I can think about, maybe I can rent out a room in my house. Maybe I can go back to work, whatever, to not draw down on that 4%. I don't have to draw down. I could still earn some active income if it doesn't mean I have a true corporate job. And so because we have that flexibility, that resourcefulness, that way of thinking, that we can control these things, we have more control over them. Cool. Any other questions or thoughts from the crowd? So I just wanted to leave you guys with a couple of resources. Again, Yield and Spread is a nonprofit. If you have never invested before, never thought about financial planning before, even if you've done it and you just want some guidance with your plan, we have a Learn to Invest and Build Wealth course. It's largely targeted for US residents, but I would say it's like 70% global in nature, 30% hyper local to the US, just because we have such an insane tax system to navigate. And that's usually the friction that holds people up. All proceeds from that go to the Life You Can Save. I also have a bunch of free resources, including the philanthropy calculator, which you guys saw. And I also have a free coaching program. It's very similar to the 80,000 hours program, if anyone does that here. So we get together and talk about your financial plans at a high level and how we can help you like set on the best path possible if you're considering like an EA career change, or if you're considering a like bumping up an earn to give pledge or something like that. And then I've also included a bunch of resources, just like from the people who guided me in my life, some who I know in person, some who I know only as online mentors. And so we'll be sure to post this this Google slide and a PDF in the EA Slack channel for those of you who want access to it. So these are, again, some really important mentors of mine. We have a question from Ricardo. I have one question. Are you familiar with Ramit Sethi? And if you are, what are your thoughts on his money advice, specifically about a split between different categories of spending? So I am familiar with Ramit. And if any of you guys are Netflix aficionados, he has a new show called like How to Be Rich. I actually really like Ramit. He's funny because from an investing perspective, from like a spending, maybe not from a spending, from an investing safety, like he teaches the fundamentals that the FIRE community practices, which is essentially the finance practices that came up with, that Jack Bogle, founder of Vanguard, came up with, that the Bogleheads group, if any of you guys heard of that, Bogle, B-O-G-L-E, Bogleheads group, there's a whole wiki on there created. And so the FIRE practice, Ramit practice, most people who advocate for like a DIY finance approach use this index fund investing strategy, risk averse, conservative. They're not huge crypto fans. They want you to just sort of set it and forget it and focus on building a life that's meaningful versus like trying to maximize your return at risk of gambling your money. So Ramit takes pretty much the same model from an investing perspective. From a savings perspective and from a spending perspective, Ramit really encourages you to, and something that I super respect is he encourages you to spend on things with meaning and cut ruthlessly on things that aren't important to you. So for me, having a nice car doesn't mean anything to me. I am trying to buy the cheapest car I could possibly have. I live in Utah, so it's not super public transit friendly, so I do need a car. And so I'm just like, what can I get to just get me from A to Z? Whereas like education and travel, super important to me. So I'm spending like very much so in those categories. So I really like Ramit Sethi. The other thing is I think Ramit is one of the only people honestly out there who is thinking about finances as a couple, because it gets doubly as hard when you have a partner. Like shake your head if anyone has had like any money arguments with your partner before. So he's a great podcast. I think it's also called How to Be Rich. And everything Ramit says, I agree with. He's a little anti-FIRE because he doesn't want people to focus on the early retirement piece as much as building a life that is important to you. Are there any resources for learning how to set up a will with EA goals in mind? I'd imagine that would be important. Ian, where are you based? So I always...
I'm currently based in the US.
Okay, cool. So I always like type in the wrong thing, and then I send people to like a pro-life, like it's because their website is it, but it's so this resource here called freewill.com. If you don't have a complicated estate, right? Maybe you're just like, you work a job, you're earning money, maybe you own a couple assets. Freewill.com will help you draw up a will for free and also let you plug in a charity of your choice to where you want to donate some or all of your funds upon your death. And then you just need a couple of witnesses to sign afterwards and get it. What's it called when you stamp it at the bank? I can't remember. Oh my gosh. With an A.
Notarized.
Thank you. Yeah, notarized. Thank you. So So I use this resource because my finances are pretty straightforward. There's nothing really complicated. If you do have a very complicated situation, like you own a few businesses or you have trusts in your name, you may want to consider hiring an estate planner, which, you know, would be a lawyer. But if it's simple, free will is perfect. Myself and a lot of people I know have used this resource. And the other thing too is if you have bank accounts, please, if you have not done so, name a beneficiary, because this is the first thing that will happen upon your death. And you can name a charity a beneficiary if you'd like. So for my 401k, I have my brother, my sister, and I have the Life You Can Save. Name a beneficiary because this is the first thing that they will look at before a will. And then you don't have to go through the whole legal process if your beneficiary is named. So if you guys have not done that, please let that be the first thing that you do, is naming beneficiaries for your bank accounts.
That's awesome. Thank you for the recommendations.
Okay, well, I believe in the gift of time. I always like to respect everyone. So if you want to go on your merry way for the day, please do. I'm happy to give another 5-10 minutes to those who want to stick around and ask me more questions. I'll be here, but otherwise, just all of you, thank you so much. And the best thing that you can do if you think personal finance is useful and helpful, like, you know, please share the information that we discussed here and the coaching program, the class, and you can always reach out to me directly via LinkedIn or via my website. You can just reach out to me. I'm happy to chat.